Nuremberg, 1934. A sea of red banners moves in the wind like a single, living organism. At the center of every flag, the same black symbol, sharp, angular, unmistakable. To millions, it meant unity. To millions more, it would soon mean death. But here's the part no one tells you. That symbol was already ancient when Germany was still a forest of tribes. It had stood carved in stone thousands of years before the Third Reich existed. It appeared in temples, on pottery, on amulets buried beneath civilizations long forgotten. It once meant good fortune. It once meant the sun. So how did a sacred sign become the most feared emblem of the 20th century? Was it simply propaganda? Or was something deeper at work? Myth, ritual, obsession? Because symbols don't change overnight. They are taken, reinterpreted, weaponized. And in the hands of one regime, this ancient mark would be transformed into a banner under which millions marched and millions died. Tonight, we trace the journey of a symbol that history cannot forgive, and ask a question that still divides the world. Was it always innocent? Or was it always waiting to be claimed? Long before it was stitched onto uniforms or raised above stadiums of saluting crowds, the swastika belonged to a different world. Its name comes from Sanskrit, swastika, a combination of su, good, and asti, to be. Roughly translated, it means well-being or good existence. The symbol appears in the Indian subcontinent as early as the 2nd millennium BCE. Archaeologists have found it engraved on pottery from the Indus Valley civilization. In Hindu tradition, it became associated with the sun, prosperity, and the cyclical nature of life. It marked entrances to homes and temples as a sign of blessing. In Buddhism, the symbol traveled east. In China and Japan, it became known as Wan, representing eternity and the infinite. Even today, it marks Buddhist temples on maps in Japan. In Jainism, it symbolizes the 4 states of existence. Across cultures, the meaning was remarkably consistent: life, motion, continuity. It was not a rare sign. It was everywhere. Archaeologists have found swastika-like motifs in ancient Troy, in classical Greek geometric pottery, and in Roman mosaics. In Northern Europe, variations of the symbol appear in pre-Christian artifacts, sometimes associated with solar imagery, sometimes with cyclical time. The key to understanding its ancient meaning lies in its shape. The arms bend at right angles, suggesting rotation, movement, a turning wheel. Many scholars interpret it as a solar symbol, representing the movement of the sun across the sky or the changing seasons. In agricultural societies, the sun was survival. It meant harvest, warmth, renewal. The symbol was simple enough to be universal, and that simplicity made it powerful. In the 19th century, European archaeologists rediscovered the swastika during excavations in Asia and the Mediterranean. It fascinated scholars. Victorian Britain even used it decoratively, on greeting cards, architecture, and jewelry, as a charm of good luck. Before the 20th century, the swastika appeared in places that would seem shocking today. On Coca-Cola promotional tokens in the early 1900s. On Finnish Air Force insignia beginning in 1918, years before Nazi Germany adopted it. On American good luck postcards, it was exotic, ancient, mystical, but still benign. No one looking at it in 1900 would have predicted its future. Because symbols do not carry inherent evil. They carry meaning, and meaning is assigned by those who wield them. At the dawn of the 20th century, Europe was changing. Empires were unstable. Nationalism was rising. Intellectual circles were obsessed with race, ancestry, and the idea of lost civilizations. And somewhere within those circles, the swastika would begin to shift. Slowly, quietly. It would move from temple walls to political pamphlets, from blessing to banner. By the late 19th century, Europe was obsessed with origins. Industrialization had transformed cities into factories of smoke and steel. Monarchies trembled. Science was challenging religion. Empires stretched across continents, yet felt strangely fragile. In this atmosphere of uncertainty, many intellectuals began searching backward, looking for purity in the distant past. Archaeology was booming. Excavations in India, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean revealed ancient civilizations older than anyone had imagined. Among the rediscovered symbols appearing in artifacts was the swastika. But something else was happening at the same time: the rise of racial theory. European philologists studying Sanskrit noticed similarities between ancient Indian languages and European ones. From this linguistic connection emerged a dangerous leap: the theory of a common Aryan origin. What began as a study of language slowly mutated into a racial ideology. In German-speaking lands, this idea found fertile ground. One of the figures who helped shape this intellectual climate was Guido von List, an Austrian mystic who blended nationalism, pagan revivalism, and esoteric runic symbolism. List promoted the idea that ancient Germanic peoples possessed hidden spiritual wisdom, wisdom suppressed by Christianity and modernity. He was not alone. A broader movement known as the Völkisch movement emerged in late 19th century Germany and Austria. It mixed romantic nationalism, anti-modernism, folklore, and increasingly anti-Semitism. Its followers idealized a mythic, pre-Christian Germanic past, a time of warriors, forests, and sacred symbols. Within this ideological landscape, the swastika began to change. It was reinterpreted not as a universal solar sign, but as a specifically Aryan one, a mark supposedly proving the ancient supremacy of Northern Europeans. This reinterpretation was not based on solid archaeology. It was myth, layered onto fragments of history. In 1918, as Germany collapsed at the end of World War I, Munich became a hotbed of radical political experimentation. One of the groups active in the city was the Thule Society, a secretive nationalist circle combining anti-Semitism, occult interests, and Aryan mythology. The Thule Society used a version of the swastika in its emblem. For its members, the symbol was no longer about prosperity or cosmic balance. It was about racial destiny. Post-war Germany was humiliated, economically shattered, and politically unstable. The Treaty of Versailles had imposed crushing reparations. Inflation devoured savings. Street violence between left-wing and right-wing factions became routine. In times of crisis, myths become powerful. The idea that Germany had once been part of a noble, ancient civilization, betrayed from within and weakened by outsiders, offered psychological comfort. Symbols tied to that imagined past became emotional anchors. The swastika, simple and visually striking, was perfect for this purpose. Unlike complex heraldic crests or religious icons, it was bold, recognizable, easy to reproduce. It looked ancient, and therefore authoritative. By 1919, nationalist groups across Germany were incorporating it into pamphlets, armbands, and banners. It began appearing at rallies, not yet unified under a single movement, but already detached from its original meaning. It had been recoded. What had once symbolized cosmic harmony now symbolized ethnic struggle. What had once stood for universal life was being narrowed into a claim of racial ownership. Importantly, this transformation did not happen overnight, nor was it inevitable. It was a deliberate act of reinterpretation. Intellectuals, mystics, and political agitators chose to assign the swastika a new story. And stories, when repeated often enough, become reality. In the early 1920s, one small political party in Munich would seize that symbol and turn it into something far larger than any occult circle could have imagined. Its leader understood something crucial. A movement without a symbol is a speech. A movement with a symbol is an identity. In 1919, Munich was unstable, angry, and searching for direction. Among the many small political groups forming in beer halls and back rooms was the German Workers' Party, a fringe nationalist movement with fewer than 60 members. One of the new recruits that year was a 30-year-old former corporal named Adolf Hitler. At the time, the party had no unified visual identity. It had no powerful imagery, no single emblem that could crystallize its ideology. Hitler understood something many politicians did not. Modern politics required spectacle. In 1920, as the party rebranded itself as the National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP, Hitler personally took control of designing its flag. In Mein Kampf, he later described the process in detail. He chose red to appeal to socialists and symbolize the movement's social idea. White, representing national unity. Black swastika, representing what he called the mission of the struggle for the victory of the Aryan man. The design was deliberate. The red field created emotional intensity. The white circle focused the eye. The tilted black swastika created motion, dynamic, aggressive, almost spinning. It was visually simple, brutally effective. When the new flag debuted in Munich in 1920, it immediately distinguished the party from its rivals. In a city crowded with competing ideologies, communists, monarchists, Republicans, the swastika flag cut through the noise. It was bold. It was stark. It looked ancient and modern at the same time. By the time of the failed beer hall putsch in 1923, the swastika was already central to Nazi iconography. Party members wore it on armbands. It appeared on pamphlets and banners. But the true transformation occurred after 1933, when Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Once in power, the swastika was no longer a party symbol. It became the symbol of the state. On September 15, 1935, the Nuremberg laws were announced at the Nazi Party rally. Shortly afterward, the swastika flag replaced the old black-red-gold tricolor as the official national flag of Germany. From that moment forward, it was everywhere. It flew over government buildings. It covered stadiums during mass rallies. It was printed on school books, coins, postage stamps. It marked uniforms, weapons, and official documents. The regime understood repetition. Architect Albert Speer designed rallies in Nuremberg where thousands of swastika banners hung in perfect symmetry. Searchlights pierced the night sky. Columns of soldiers marched beneath the symbol in choreographed precision. The effect was not accidental. Psychologists later analyzed the rallies as exercises in collective identity formation. The symbol functioned as a focal point, something larger than the individual. Under its presence, people felt absorbed into a movement. The swastika became a unifying myth. It suggested continuity with an imagined ancient past. It suggested destiny. It suggested inevitability. For young Germans growing up in the 1930s, the symbol was inseparable from normal life. Children saluted it in school. It adorned textbooks. It framed public ceremonies. And slowly, it began to accompany something else: exclusion. In 1935, the Nuremberg laws stripped German Jews of citizenship. Swastika banners flew overhead as these laws were proclaimed. The symbol became a backdrop to legal discrimination. By 1938, during Kristallnacht, synagogues burned while swastika flags hung from public buildings. The emblem that had once represented a political movement now represented state power and state violence. When Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939, swastika flags appeared in occupied cities within days. Soldiers planted them in conquered territory as declarations of control. The symbol traveled with tanks into France, with bombers over London, with divisions deep into the Soviet Union. It marked not only ideology, but expansion. By the early 1940s, the swastika had become inseparable from war itself. But there was another layer, one that operated beyond politics and propaganda. Within the inner circles of the regime, some believed the symbol was more than a national emblem. They believed it was sacred. By the mid-1930s, the swastika no longer needed explanation. It dominated public life. It crowned rallies, sealed decrees, marked uniforms. But for some within the regime, that was not enough. Under Heinrich Himmler, the Schutzstaffel, the SS, began reshaping itself not merely as an elite military force, but as something closer to a racial order. Himmler envisioned the SS as a modern knightly brotherhood, bound by blood, ancestry, and myth. And symbols were central to that vision. Himmler was deeply influenced by Germanic Romanticism and pseudo-historical theories that claimed ancient Northern Europeans had once possessed a powerful spiritual civilization. He believed Christianity had weakened German identity. What he sought was a revival, or rather, an invention, of a pre-Christian Germanic sacred tradition. The swastika, already the emblem of the Reich, was woven into this imagined past. In 1934, Himmler took control of Wewelsburg Castle, a Renaissance fortress in Westphalia. He planned to transform it into an ideological center for the SS. Renovations began. Rooms were redesigned. Ceremonial halls were created. In the North Tower, a circular hall was constructed with 12 pillars, intended to symbolize an inner circle of elite SS leaders. Beneath it lay a crypt-like chamber. On the floor of the upper hall was installed a dark mosaic, often referred to today as the Black Sun. While not a swastika in the traditional form, the radial design echoed similar rotational symbolism, suggesting cosmic force, movement, and eternal return. Though historians debate the exact ceremonial use of these spaces, it is clear that Wewelsburg was intended as more than a headquarters. It was designed as a symbolic center, a place where ideology took on ritual form. Within the SS, the swastika was treated as more than a state insignia. It adorned ceremonial daggers. It was present at oath-taking rituals. Recruits pledged loyalty not only to Hitler personally, but to the Reich embodied in its symbols. The SS oath, formalized in 1934 after the death of President Hindenburg, required soldiers to swear unconditional obedience to Hitler. The emblem under which they stood reinforced that pledge visually. Himmler also established the Ahnenerbe in 1935, officially called the Ancestral Heritage Research and Teaching Society. Its mission was to investigate the supposed historical achievements of the Aryan race. In practice, it sponsored archaeological expeditions, racial studies, and ideological research intended to legitimize Nazi racial doctrine. Swastika insignia accompanied these expeditions. When German teams traveled to Tibet in 1938 to 1939 under SS sponsorship, they sought evidence of ancient Aryan origins. The presence of swastika motifs in Asian cultures was reinterpreted as confirmation of racial myths rather than shared symbolic heritage. The regime reframed coincidence as destiny. Ritual and aesthetics reinforced power. Torchlight processions, uniform symmetry, carefully staged ceremonies. The swastika was omnipresent in these choreographed environments, creating a sense that the regime was aligned with something eternal. But myth cannot erase reality. As the war intensified, the symbol increasingly accompanied atrocity. SS divisions bearing swastika insignia were deployed across occupied Europe. The emblem appeared on uniforms of units involved in mass shootings in Eastern Europe. It hung over concentration camps where millions were imprisoned and murdered. At the gates of Auschwitz, Dachau, and Treblinka, the swastika was not abstract. It was authority. The regime had succeeded in fusing symbol and state so completely that separating them became impossible. The swastika no longer needed ritual to be powerful. It had become the visual shorthand for a system of terror. And when the Reich began to collapse in 1945, that same emblem, once projected as eternal, was torn down from buildings, burned in public squares, and stripped from uniforms of captured soldiers. What had been declared sacred was reduced to debris. Yet its power did not disappear with the fall of Berlin. It had already carved itself into global memory. April 1945. Berlin was no longer a capital. It was a ruin. Entire districts had been reduced to skeletal walls and ash. The air smelled of smoke, dust, and defeat. Inside the Führer bunker, beneath the Reich chancellery, Adolf Hitler dictated his final political testament. Outside, artillery from the advancing Soviet army echoed through the shattered streets. For 12 years, the swastika had dominated Germany's skyline. It crowned ministries, draped stadiums, framed speeches, and flew over every occupied territory from Paris to Kiev. Now, it fluttered over rubble. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler died. Within days, Soviet forces fought their way to the Reichstag, the symbolic heart of German state power. In one of the most iconic images of the war, Soviet soldiers raised the Red Army flag above the building's ruins. The swastika banners that had once proclaimed permanence were ripped down, trampled, or burned. The regime had promised a 1,000-year Reich. It lasted 12. But the fall of Berlin did not immediately strip the symbol of power. Even in collapse, it retained its emotional charge. Civilians tore armbands from their sleeves in panic. Officers attempted to conceal insignia before surrendering. The act of removing the swastika became a ritual of survival. For many Germans, the symbol transformed overnight, from emblem of pride to evidence of guilt. Across Europe, Allied troops encountered the same sight. Abandoned headquarters with swastika flags hastily discarded. In Paris, where the emblem had flown above official buildings during occupation, liberation crowds celebrated beneath its absence. In Poland and the Soviet Union, the symbol had marked years of brutality. Its removal felt like the lifting of a shadow. Yet what do you do with a symbol that has defined an entire state? Destroying banners was easy. Erasing meaning was not. In November 1945, the International Military Tribunal convened in Nuremberg. The city that had hosted massive Nazi rallies now became the site of legal reckoning. The courtroom was austere, the proceedings methodical. For the first time in history, leaders of a defeated regime were prosecuted for crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Behind the defendants, figures such as Hermann Göring and Rudolf Hess, the swastika no longer hung as a banner of triumph. Instead, it appeared in evidence films and photographs documenting rallies, decrees, uniforms, and concentration camps. Prosecutors presented visual proof of how the regime used symbols to embed ideology into daily life. Films shown in the courtroom displayed torchlit parades, symmetrical formations, and colossal swastika backdrops that framed speeches promising racial purification and territorial conquest. The symbol was no longer propaganda. It was context. One of the tribunal's most significant decisions was the declaration of the SS as a criminal organization. The SS uniform, bearing swastika insignia and runic emblems, had become inseparable from systemic violence. By legally condemning the organization, the tribunal indirectly condemned its visual language. This was unprecedented. Never before had a symbol been so publicly associated with internationally prosecuted crimes. The Nuremberg trials did not ban the swastika, but they established its moral status in global consciousness. It became the visual shorthand for genocide and aggressive war. After 1946, no one could plausibly claim ignorance of what it represented. In occupied Germany, the Allies initiated a program known as denazification. Its purpose was to dismantle the ideological infrastructure of the Third Reich. This included symbols. Public displays of the swastika were removed. Street signs bearing Nazi insignia were replaced. Monuments were dismantled. Coins and official documents were redesigned. Schools were purged of textbooks containing the emblem. Uniforms were destroyed. Propaganda posters were confiscated. The removal was systematic. But memory persisted. Some Germans attempted to downplay the significance of the symbol, framing it as mere state branding detached from crimes. Others insisted it had been misused, but the scale of evidence presented at Nuremberg made such arguments difficult to sustain. In 1949, West Germany, the Federal Republic of Germany, was founded. As the new democratic state established its identity, it faced a fundamental question: how to prevent the return of the ideology that had nearly destroyed Europe. The answer included law. In modern Germany, the display of Nazi symbols, including the swastika, is prohibited under Section 86A of the German Criminal Code. The law bans the dissemination and public use of symbols associated with unconstitutional organizations, including the Nazi Party. Exceptions exist for educational, academic, or artistic contexts, but the general principle is clear. The symbol cannot be used as political expression. Austria enacted similar prohibitions. The criminalization of a symbol is rare in democratic societies. Freedom of expression typically protects even offensive imagery. But in Germany's case, the historical burden justified legal restriction. The swastika had become more than an image. It was inseparable from a regime responsible for tens of millions of deaths. The ban itself became part of post-war German identity, a visible rejection of the past. Outside Germany, the symbol's meaning solidified rapidly. In the United States and Western Europe, it became synonymous with fascism and anti-Semitism. It appeared in history books as the emblem of totalitarianism. It marked extremist groups attempting to revive Nazi ideology, groups that remained marginal but persistent. In Eastern Europe, where the war had been especially brutal, the symbol retained a visceral association with occupation and mass killing. Yet beyond Europe, the story was more complex. In India, Nepal, and parts of East Asia, the swastika continued to function as a sacred sign. On temple doors, wedding invitations, and festival decorations, it retained its ancient meaning. Maps in Japan still use the symbol to mark Buddhist temples. This dual existence creates tension. In Western contexts, the symbol provokes horror. In parts of Asia, it conveys blessing. The divergence raises a difficult question. Can historical trauma override millennia of prior meaning? For many in Europe and North America, the answer is yes. The events of 1933 to 1945 were so catastrophic that they permanently redefined the symbol within those cultural spheres. The Holocaust, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews, along with millions of others targeted by Nazi policy, fused the swastika to genocide in global consciousness. It is not merely associated with the regime, it is emblematic of it. In the final days of the war, photographs captured swastika flags burning in city squares. Soldiers posed with captured banners as trophies. Civilians tore insignia from uniforms before surrendering. The destruction of the symbol was symbolic in itself, a visible act of rejection. Yet symbols are not destroyed so easily. Neo-Nazi movements in the post-war decades adopted the swastika as a provocation, aware of its power to shock. Its continued appearance in extremist contexts reinforced its association with hate. Each reappearance deepened its post-war meaning. Unlike ancient carvings on temple walls, these modern displays were intentional attempts to invoke the ideology of the Third Reich. The symbol's afterlife became part of its transformation. There is a cruel irony in the swastika's story. The regime that adopted it sought permanence, a 1,000-year empire. The state collapsed. The leadership was tried or killed. The institutions were dismantled. But the symbol endured. It endures precisely because of the catastrophe it came to represent. Had the Third Reich faded without global war or genocide, the swastika might have been remembered as a nationalist emblem of a failed regime. Instead, it became the visual shorthand for one of the darkest chapters in human history. Few symbols have undergone such a radical and irreversible transformation. Once carved as a sign of well-being, it now stands as a warning. It marks museum exhibits documenting atrocities. It appears in textbooks, explaining the dangers of totalitarianism. It is studied in courses on propaganda, psychology, and law. Its power no longer lies in mobilization, but in memory. And memory can be as enduring as stone. When the swastika was first carved thousands of years ago, it represented cosmic order and renewal. In the 20th century, it became the banner of destruction. The collapse of the Third Reich did not restore its ancient innocence. It fixed its modern meaning in place. A symbol that once traveled across civilizations now carries a single dominant association in much of the world. Not the sun, but the shadow cast by it. Symbols outlive the empires that claim them. The Third Reich collapsed in 1945. Its leaders were tried, its armies defeated, its cities rebuilt. But the swastika did not disappear with the ruins of Berlin. It remained, fractured between two histories. In parts of India, it is still drawn in red pigment at weddings. In Buddhist temples across East Asia, it marks sacred space. For those cultures, the symbol predates Europe's catastrophe by millennia. And yet, in Europe and North America, its meaning is almost singular. It evokes rallies lit by torches. It evokes uniforms. It evokes deportations, camps, and smoke. No other ancient symbol has undergone such a violent transformation in modern memory. This raises a question historians, philosophers, and legal scholars continue to debate. Is meaning fixed by origin or by consequence? If a sign once represented life, but later accompanied mass death, which history defines it? Germany answered that question with law. By criminalizing its public display, the Federal Republic made a moral statement. Some symbols become inseparable from the crimes committed under them. Other cultures answer differently. They distinguish between the ancient and the modern forms, between sacred geometry and political appropriation. Both realities exist simultaneously. The swastika is one of the rare symbols that forces the world to confront how fragile meaning truly is. A shape of four bent arms. Nothing more, nothing less. Yet in the 20th century, that shape became a banner under which millions marched, and millions were murdered. The transformation did not happen by accident. It was deliberate. It was ideological. It was theatrical. It was enforced through repetition, ritual, and violence. The story of the swastika is not only about Germany. It is about how power captures symbols, how myth can override history, how repetition can overwrite innocence, and how a simple mark can be weaponized into identity. Today, when we see the swastika, we do not see ancient solar cycles. We see the memory of a regime that reshaped the world through war and genocide. The sun once meant renewal. In the 20th century, it cast a different light, and history has not forgotten.